It's time for The Verdict. The Verdict is a lively discussion of current events and legal issues pertinent to Oklahomans. The Verdict is hosted by Kent Myers and Mick Cornett. It's time for The Verdict.
Hello and welcome once again to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, another show dealing with topical events, and there's nothing more topical than today's topic.
There is nothing more topical. I do have a trivia question for you.
Okay.
Though. Our guest today is the Honorable Todd Hiett, the Speaker-elect of the Oklahoma House of Representatives. What does Todd Hiett have in common with George B. Schwabe?
Well, I don't know George Schwabe, but based on what I know about Todd Hyatt, I would assume, is he the last Republican to be Speaker of the House?
Yes. 80 years ago, George B. Schwabe was a Republican Speaker of the Oklahoma House of Representatives, and there has not been one since then until now. And we're going to get, in a few minutes, a chance to visit with Todd Hyatt, the first Republican Speaker of the House in 80 years. He will be facing a daunting challenge, having a barely democratically controlled Senate, and of course a Democratic governor to deal with, and it will be interesting to visit with Representative Hyatt on what he plans to do with that.
And we'll get started when we return. It's The Verdict. Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers, and Kent's going to introduce our guest.
Just very honored to have the Honorable Todd Hyatt join us. Todd is the Speaker-elect of the Oklahoma House of Representatives, the first Republican in 80 years to occupy that position. Todd is from Kellyville, or in the area of Kellyville, Oklahoma. He is a rancher and cattleman. He is a graduate of Oklahoma State University. He's what he is referred to as a citizen legislator, and we'll talk more about that as we go along. This is his first, and I certainly hope not his last visit with us on The Verdict. Mr. Speaker, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We're glad to have you.
Yes.
Well, first of all, congratulations.
Thank you.
Is it sunk in yet that you're actually going to have a little more say-so in this next legislative session than you've had before?
It has. As a matter of fact, Tuesday night, November 2nd, was a very exciting night. Of course, it's on top of the world, accomplishing 57 Republican members being victorious in their elections and taking majority for the first time since 1922. It's very exciting, but Wednesday morning the work started.
Yeah.
And we've been working hard and long hours ever since, and so I know we're going to continue.
Mr. Speaker, to the average citizen, they know you're in a position of power. I don't know if they necessarily know how that power is accumulated and why it makes a difference. Can you explain the specific powers that the Speaker's role might have in the state legislature?
Well, all appropriations bills begin in the House, and of course, all bills must go through the House before they can get to the governor's desk. And so, with the new Republican control in the House of Representatives, for the first time in many, many years, we actually do have a two-party state now, where both parties will be at the table. Of course, I, as a Republican, have no idea that Republicans now completely control the state. You know, we know that we still have a Democrat Senate, and there will be an inner working there to bring good ideas together. And I think that's the way the people intended it. That's what I hear from the people in my area. They want Democrats and Republicans to work together.
There is a margin of 8 or 9 seats, 7 or 8 seats.
It's 57-44.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my. Well,
Yes.
were you surprised not that you got that the Republicans got control, but at the margin that you did get control with?
I knew we had that opportunity to get up into the high 50s. We had just an excellent slate of Republican candidates. Of course, that didn't just happen. I spent a good portion of 2003 along with several of my colleagues recruiting candidates. It's hard to get people to run for the House. The pay is not that great, and the work's harder than most people think that it is. And so it's hard to get people to run for the House, but we were able to identify some real quality people to run, and that's the key to winning these elections, is having a quality individual on the ballot. And so with that quality, we were able to attain 57, and we knew we could get there, but probably was a little bit surprised that we actually did get there.
Term limits are being attributed to one of the reasons that the Republicans
Yes.
were able to take control. Term limits, one of the criticisms of term limits is that it takes the most experienced representatives, arguably the most knowledgeable representatives, and it eliminates them from the picture. How do you replace that institutional memory, that knowledge, the long-term knowledge gained by many years of serving?
Well, keep in mind, institutional memory can be good and bad. There's some of it that we need to forget. And then there are other things, more of your technical and procedural issues that we will have to remember. But the members that are there now have been there for 12 years. I will be in the class that's the most senior class. We have been there for, well, we have served 10 years, going on our final term to serve out 12 years. I've heard a lot of people say about term limits that term limits is not a good thing because a legislator is just beginning to get a grasp of things in that 12 years. I kind of laugh at that because I think, if you look at the private sector, what employee waits 12 years before they get up to speed on their job? I think if you can't get up to speed to be an effective legislator in 12 years, you probably didn't need to be there to start with.
I'm familiar with a little bit of your personal story and I'd like for you to discuss two parts of it, if you will. One, kind of what you went through to first decide to run for office, and then second, what you did these last 2 years to try to shape how the legislative process works.
Well, I come from a farming, ranching background. Had never had an intention of running for public office. Was really outside the political arena, was not even involved at my local level until, as I was a young farmer trying to get off the ground and make my business successful, I had a couple of real struggles. I was a victim of a frivolous lawsuit, which educated me quickly of the need for tort reform in this state, and this was back in '92, I guess. And then I had a state agency that became involved in my farm, having to do some procedures on my cattle, and during the time they were doing that, I realized that the government was treating me as if I was maybe a common criminal or that they were doing me a favor. And I thought, here I am, I'm young, I'm working hard every day to make this business successful. I'm not on welfare, I'm not in prison anywhere, I'm not on drugs, I'm just working hard trying to make a living. But the two things that are causing me the greatest problems, this lawsuit that's frivolous, I ended up winning, of course, in the end. It was a ridiculous lawsuit. The other thing was the government being involved in my business and causing me problems. And so I started to get involved. I decided that I really don't know what's going on in state government, but I think it's incumbent upon me to find out and to have my voice heard. And so I started getting involved and following the issues, and of course, next thing I knew, I guess I got a little too close to the fire. I ended up running for office in 1994 and was victorious in that election and have served since. Now, to fast forward to the last 2 years, your question about what have we been doing to come to this point where we elected 57 Republicans. I took office as the Republican leader or minority leader in November of 2002. I knew that we had the greatest opportunity in many, many years to change out the management in the state legislature. And I have thought for some time that that's really what Oklahoma needs. We need a set of decision makers that are more in tune with the people of Oklahoma and more in tune with business and industry in Oklahoma and have a better understanding of our economy. We need decision makers like that in place, and this is the greatest opportunity, probably in history, to change that out. And so I sold my dairy farm. I had been milking cows for 150 Holstein
Literally?
cows.
Were you under the cow milking it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we milked 150 cows.
Early in the morning.
Early in the morning and late in the evening, yes. And of course, it was ranching also, but I sold out the dairy, not my farm, but I sold the cattle. Had also worked as a livestock auctioneer for many years. Quit my job as a livestock auctioneer, and so that I could dedicate 2 years of my life to finding the quality candidates, those good decision makers that I mentioned, and putting together the resources and the plans to make them successful in their elections. So Tuesday, November 2nd was a great day for me to see an end to what was a lot of long, hard work for 2 years, but we were victorious. A great night for us.
Let me jump in and get us to a break. Todd Hiett is the Speaker-elect of the Oklahoma House of Representatives, our guest today on The Verdict. We'll be right back. Welcome back to The Verdict. Mick Cornett, Kent Myers, and Speaker-elect Todd Hiett. Let's talk about bipartisanship. You mentioned that you and the Republicans are now in control of the House of Representatives, but still the Democrats control the state Senate, and of course there's a Democrat in the governor's office. How does all that work? How do you wake up every day and not just bang your head against the wall, but say, we're going to get something accomplished?
Well, that's my goal. I have met with Senator Hobson, leader of the Senate, have visited with Governor Henry, and our goal is to find areas of agreement. Now, Senator Hobson and I have great respect for one another personally. Politically, it seems we disagree on almost everything. His vision for Oklahoma is very different from mine, and he would acknowledge the same thing if he were here at the table with us. But we have great respect for one another personally, and I'm hoping that we can turn that into an opportunity for us to find the areas where we can agree, because I realize that my passing a workers' comp bill or a tort reform bill through the House does not make it law. It has to pass through the Senate. So it's going to be my effort to work hard in that direction.
And how do you?
Go ahead.
How do you work with the governor? How does that transpire?
Well, obviously the governor is at a point that he'll be the final say. My expectation is that if a workers' comp bill would make it to his desk, I would assume that he would be inclined to sign it because he's up for re-election in 2006. I don't think he could veto a bill of that magnitude and make it through his re-election, and I think he's aware of that. But really where the key comes in for Governor Henry is what is he going to do to help get these issues through the Senate? Because he is the one, Senator Hobson probably is not going to be inclined to embrace some of these issues, such as workers' comp reform. But Governor Henry's in a position that he could use his executive ability and his leverage to encourage Senator Hobson and the Democrat leadership in the Senate to pass these bills through the Senate so we can get them to his desk. So a lot weighing on Governor Henry this session in terms of getting this agenda passed.
You mentioned tort reform a couple of times, and I noticed in doing some reading that that's one of the major things you'd hope to accomplish. There was some discussion at the end of last session that for some reason there was some thought that this might not come up again because of some agreements in the Senate or elsewhere, but apparently not in the House, not to address tort reform in this session. It's my understanding you don't feel bound by any such agreements in the House not to bring up tort reform.
Certainly I have not agreed, nor would I agree to a moratorium on tort reform, bringing further tort reform. As a matter of fact, I feel the opposite. I feel like we do need to further our efforts in tort reform and plan to push that. Now Governor Henry and Senator Hobson will have to make a decision for themselves whether they're bound to that moratorium. I hope they are not.
Well, when we discuss workers' compensation, specifically, how would you like to see the system change?
Well, just less litigation. Oklahoma is a state that has a system that encourages litigation. And if you look at what other states across the nation have done the last 12 years, most of them have moved away from that system where such a high percentage of the cases go to court. And it's accomplished a couple of things. It creates savings on the business side for that employer, but it also creates higher benefit payouts for the injured workers, because when you take the litigation out, that's the expensive part of the process. And so that's the direction that we'd like to go.
Can you do something in 05?
I will try. I sure hope so. I think I know that we will have a bill come out of the House. I feel confident that we will have the votes to get a bill out of the House.
And then what would happen to it then?
Well, it go to the Senate, and that's the big question. And what will the Senate pass the bill, or will they bottle it up in committee, and we won't hear from it again?
And and if they bottled it up, the term you use, does it disappear at that point?
Yes.
And so nothing would happen in workers' compensation under that scenario?
That is a possibility.
Now, the Senate is only barely controlled democratically by a couple of seats, I think. And there are, as we've discussed on a previous show with another guest, there are like 7 or 9 senators term limiting out this time, and they're all Democratic.
Right.
Would you envision that there's a substantial likelihood that in 2 years the Republicans would take over the Senate as well?
I think there are 13 senators terming out in the '06 election cycle. All of those senators are Democrats.
13.
And so it appears that Republicans probably would take the majority, since they're so close right now. They just need to pick up 2 seats to take the majority. It appears that Republicans would take the majority. I think if the Democrat leadership in the Senate, Senator Hobson, would block these key issues in terms of bringing economic growth and jobs and higher wages, if they block these issues, it may not be a matter of the Republicans taking the majority. It may be a matter of how far they take the majority, because I think that will play a major role in the '06 elections, and it could be that we'll see the Republicans pick up a much larger number of Republican senators than had been originally expected.
Mm-hmm. As Speaker, you have not only legislative responsibilities, but you have administrative responsibilities as well. Staff. There are probably an awful lot of staff personnel in the House that work directly or indirectly for the Speaker's office. I suppose you're dealing with those issues now, and how large a responsibility is that for you?
That is a large responsibility, and we have a hard-working staff, and I would expect majority of that staff to stay in place and continue. Obviously, when you have a new administration come in, whether it's a new governor or a new president, in this case, a new Speaker of the House, there will be some changes. Because obviously I have a different vision for Oklahoma than what the past administration has had, and I will want to put people in place that can help me to advance that vision.
There's really no blueprint for what we're about to see. We've never,
That's right.
in our lifetimes, have had one party in control of one part of the House and another party in control of the other House. Is it safe to say that either a lot's going to happen or nothing's going to happen, or do you see somewhere in between?
Well, it's my hope that a lot will happen, and I think with the election, the '06 elections looming, and the Senate being up in the air in terms of who will be the majority, Governor Henry being on the ballot in '06, having the Republican majority in the House, I think that's a good combination to get things done. And also, I might note that on a bright spot, Jerry Askins, the Democrat leader in the House of Representatives, a friend of mine, she and I came in together into the House in 1994. We've worked very well together, never had a crossword. I expect to have a good working relationship with the Democrats in the House.
Speaker-elect Todd Hyatt, thank you for coming on The Verdict.
Thank you so much.
Kent and I'll have a final word after this. Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Our guest this week was Speaker-elect Todd Hyatt, a very interesting person.
Indeed, comes from an interesting background, has done a lot in his private life to make himself qualified for this very high position. We do appreciate Speaker Hyatt giving us time, coming out, spending the time with us so we can bring you, our viewer, the information about what's going on in the upcoming session. I do want to take this opportunity to welcome a new sponsor to the show. Cassidy School is going to be sponsoring with us now for a while, and at Cassidy School, that's a place where children have multiple choices for a meaningful life. Thanks to Charlie Britton and Bonnie Gerard for having Cassidy School join us as a sponsor. We look forward to it, and for those that are so inclined, go Cyclones.
And we'll be back next week with another show. In the meantime, visit our website, theverdict.tv. See you next week.